Merry Christmas, everybody. In this video, we're going to discuss the OSR. We're going to discuss Dungeon Crawl Classics and why I prefer that over modern games or 5th edition. And along with me today is my fiance, Stephanie, who's also co-DMing a 5th edition campaign that her and I are running with another group. And she's going to offer her insight, both as a younger gamer and from the female perspective. So this should be an interesting, hopefully interesting conversation. So we'll see you in there. Hi, everybody. And once again, Merry Christmas. It's a festive day. We have the dog in the room right now, and the cat may make an appearance. So that is both awesome and terrifying at the same time. Before we get started, I'm going to highlight an awesome product that I got. It's my Christmas present to myself. This is the gelatinous cube statue. This thing is massive and very heavy and very awesome for my desk. If you've seen this around and are thinking about picking it up, it does make a really cool gamer gift. Everyone really, appreciates watching this thing come down the hallway at them. And you can see there's a guy who's been dissolved. There's a little beholder who's been dissolved in there. You can kind of play a guessing game as to what else is inside there. I can't really tell, but this is a really cool little piece of statuary. All right. So the purpose of this video today was to discuss Dungeon Crawl Classics compared to 5th edition. And I don't want to approach this from an edition wars type of thing where we're going to fight and I'm going to make nasty comments about things that I don't like, because I don't think that's fair, and people like whatever they like for the reasons that they like. But one of the things I've been struggling with for many years is I haven't really been into role-playing games as much as I used to be. And I thought that it was because I was just getting older and I just lost my fire for it. Well, it turns out I was trying to do something that I really wasn't into. And it took a lot of introspective understanding and analyzing what my problem was. That being said, Stephanie also plays role-playing games. And so we co-DM a 5th edition group that plays usually on the weekends. When her and I started dating, we actually played together 5th edition. So we were doing like Curse of Strahd and things like that. And I managed to pull her into some OSR gaming with my online group. So she has got to experience both sides of the fence, both worlds, as it were, in terms of how you approach. So what would you say your experience has been with that type of experience?
I think playing amongst different versions, starting in the beginning with 5e, it brings forth the opportunity for creativity. And I think it's very guided for people who may not know where to start on their own adventures and creating their own content. Luckily for us, I have ridiculous amounts of creativity in terms of using Gravity Falls for inspiration, using Rick and Morty for inspiration, using really anything that I fall in love with as inspiration. Learning in 3rd edition, it's certainly changed. 5th edition.
And that's where you started 3rd edition?
Yep. I started in 3rd edition in college. That was 2008, probably. But it's certainly changed. I have my gripes, of course. I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit. But truly, it's been nice for someone who has been coming in as a fairly ill-experienced DM. It was good for me to get my feet wet.
Cool. Yeah. So I want to kind of go over the differences between the two, and if you wanted to approach which edition you like the most or what you're after for a game, I think that's important. The most important part of any group, I think, is session 0. And session 0 is where you sit down with your group and say, this is the expectations of this game. This is what you can expect from me as the DM, and this is what I expect from you as the players. And you all come to a mutual agreement. I'm going to do some future videos on where I had to learn that the hard way, that I had failed as I gotten older to continue to think that games were approached as they were when I first started, which was the late 1980s. And I stopped being able to read the room very well, and that had led to some drama. So those are hard lessons learned that maybe if you're new, you won't have to learn my lessons, and you can kind of take those words to heart. So if you're not familiar, Dungeon Crawl Classics Here's the main rule book. This is my current primary book, my primary game, I should say, the one that I like the most. When I compare what I look at from all the different games I've played, I started with AD&D the first edition, but we only played like 5 games of that. And so I spent most of my formative years in second edition through the 1990s, second edition, and then we made the jump to third edition. And I actually enjoyed third edition as well. Second edition is what I call my home. It's where I'm the most comfortable, and it's where I had the most fun. But second edition has some bugbears, to push a pun. Haha, bugbear, the monster. It has some things that are annoying about it that I don't like, and I would not like to continue to do. THAC0 being the first thing. And in THAC0, that was like the inverted math, right? So if you had a THAC0 of 17, that means you were +3 to hit, and you had to do the math in your head. And a lot of people had some problems with that. It just wasn't intuitive. And third edition got rid of that. I'm also not a big fan of how spellcasters are in the older editions, just because they're not very useful. Wizards come out the gate with one spell, and then they hide for the rest of the day. So it doesn't make for a fun game. They're there to kind of hope that they get high enough level where they can be useful. And so I do like how modern games make wizards more useful, or spellcasters in general more useful. So those are things that I enjoy. 5th edition has some cool mechanics as well that I liked. I really liked advantage and disadvantage because it's easy. If they have advantage, you roll 2 dice and take the highest. If you have disadvantage, you roll 2 dice and take the lowest. Whereas in older editions, you had tables of numbers you had to memorize, and you had to look up charts, and you had to do all the calculations. Go, okay, I'm at a +4. And that just slowed the game down. So I do really appreciate that in 5th edition. But that's where things start to get off the rails for me. So we have to look at what we enjoy out of gaming. Why do you play in the first place? Why are you playing games in the first place? The big thing that I've noticed with most groups today, and this has been true for decades, is that players play to tell stories with their friends or with strangers, but they're there to tell the story first. I am not there to tell the story first. I got into D&D because of the challenge, and that's kind of why I like games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, because I like to be kicked in the face over and over again. But the moment you actually achieve victory, it actually feels good. That's my dopamine hit, is when I actually beat something hard and get rewarded for it. Whereas when I play these newer games, it's more rigged towards the player, so it kind of feels like I'm watching a professional wrestling match. It's fun, but it's predetermined. And that's where I'm not there to tell the story first. So, Stephanie, what drives you to play role-playing games? Like, where do you get your enjoyment from?
I think it's the thrill of creating a world in which I can be whoever I want. And I know that's a very normal answer because everybody likes to be this fantastical version of themselves, but truly it gives the opportunity for my imagination to be free. Having a history in creative writing, it's super fun for me to create very almost palpable experiences, something you can smell, something you can taste, something you can feel. What's the temperature? It's incredibly important to set the mood. But it gives you the opportunity to express yourself, whether it be as someone totally opposite, like me being a barbarian. I'm 5'2" barely. There's no way I could be a barbarian in real life. I look tall when I sit. But
she's taller than me right now.
The nice thing that I really love about it truly is just that, and also watching others blossom. I have a personal close friend that joined our group, and watching almost their confidence in social interactions, watching their confidence in expressing their imagination. It's not an easy thing to do. I think it's just wonderful in all aspects to progress in personality, to progress in social interaction and less social awkward situations, because small talk is hard, and really letting yourself be free, giving an accent every once in a while, doing an action when I do my shillelagh or however you pronounce it, I still don't know. But it's fun. It lets you let your guard down and just be free.
So everyone approaches games differently. There's a different reason why people are motivated to come sit at your table, or for you to sit at someone else's table, and that's important to realize. It's not just you, and it's not just the other players. And the DM is another player at the table, and their desires and wants are just as valid as the players are. It's coming up with a group that wants to do those things in the same way. So let's talk about the differences between OSR, or why I chose Dungeon Crawl Classics as my primary game, and why 5th edition is not as exciting for me. And the first thing out of the gate is the challenge. And we kind of talked a little bit about that earlier. Everything I say, everything I point out, to the caveat is everything that I don't like about 5th edition, I can make 5th edition do. I can house rule whatever I want, and it's fine, right? I don't like house ruling as much. I want to be very specific. I don't like to house rule codified rule sets that are very rules oriented. And I don't like to do that because I've had a lot of drama in the past with people who don't like house rules. And 5th edition is it's character sheet centric. Players go, what can my character do? And usually it's on the character sheet. The character sheet dictates what they can do. So people don't like when the DM messes with that and changes that. There's an expectation at the table that you're playing the game, rules is written. And while some groups are fine with house rules, others aren't. And I tend to stay away from house ruling. So while I can change 5th edition to be something I like, there's going to be some kickback, and I just don't want to deal with that. OSR games are rules light. They're abstract for a reason. They are meant for the DM to be able to house rule however they want. So I have no problem with house ruling Dungeon Crawl Classics or AD&D or any older game, because they're more of an abstract system that tells you the DM is free to do these things, and the players understand that and expect that. There is no hard rule for everything like there is in modern games. So what do you think about that for the rules, and as a DM, the difference between those two things?
I mean, I think 5th edition has a lot of rules. And for someone who's not an avid, huge book reader, it can be very overwhelming to remember everything. The things that I love about, like when we play DCC on Thursdays or Fridays, it really is player-led. There's not as many rules. Of course, there's some in terms of spellcasting, things like that, but you have a lot more freedom to let people play. 5th edition does feel a little more strict in a lot of ways, and also sometimes silly. I say that with love, but truly as a DM, it can be overwhelming to have so many rules.
Sure, yeah. And the fun thing is 5th edition doesn't even have as many rules as, say, 3rd edition. 3rd edition was really, and Pathfinder, which became what 3rd edition was, is all about rules. So I can change 5th edition to be what I want, but player expectation is they expect it a certain way. It's designed for a certain audience, and to change it, to me, it makes me have to politic, and that's just something I don't enjoy. I don't like having to politic in my games. So that actually is a point for OSR and why I like OSR, even though it's not directly impacting me. It is, in that I have more freedom as a DM, or I feel like I have more freedom as a DM. The counter argument is always, you can do whatever you want as a DM. But again, if you don't have any players at your table, you're DMing for yourself. So challenge, going back to that, looping back, is my number one annoyance with 5th edition. I play the game for challenging. That doesn't mean I sit down as a DM and go, God, I can't wait to kill all your characters. How many characters have died in the weekend session in our 5th edition?
Not a single one.
Not a single one. And that's because it's my goal is not to kill characters. It's never been to kill characters. It's been to challenge the characters. And I think I've done a pretty good job when I DM in the 5th edition group to challenge them and make them feel tension. It's just I have to do it a little bit differently, and I have to expend a little bit more energy to do it. In the OSR, it's a lot easier to scare your players. There's things like the undead, which drain levels. That brings an implied sense of fear to the table, that the number one answer your group isn't going to be, let's charge the vampire and kill it, because they know the vampire can drain levels. So they're going to come at it a little bit more creative. In 5th edition, they're going to charge the vampire, and they're probably going to kill it in 2 or 3 rounds. It's not going to be very difficult, usually, depending on the level of your party, of course. So you have that. You also have the concept of balanced encounters do not exist in the OSR. Balanced encounters came about in 3rd edition. And we've been doing balance encounters probably most of D&D's lifetime. In AD&D as a DM, I would sit down and, in the monster manual, it would say, oh, you can counter goblins. And it would say there's 4d6 of them. So there's 4 to 24 of them. And if I rolled 24 and there's only 4 players and they're level 1, I'm probably going to fudge that a little bit. So there's not 24. So we've already been doing this. It's just that the concept of balance encounters became mandatory for a lot of people. Like every encounter has to be balanced. And video game culture has also kind of led into that, where wherever I go in the world, I know that if the DM has put an encounter in front of me, I should be able to fight it and kill it. OSR, that's not the case. You can randomly encounter anything. And if if players encounter it, they go, that's the culture of the game. That's to be expected. In 5th edition, if I were to drop Tiamat down at level 1, I would never do that. But if I did it and they charged it and died, there would be some hurt feelings. The balance encounters also kind of, and I'm going to cover this in a different video where we talk about dice and why do we even need them. It's a misnomer, I think, because it's not really balance. When you think of balance, in the wargaming world, balance means both sides of the equation have an equal chance of winning. In Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games, balance encounters does not mean that. A balance encounter means that the players should win. It's something that the players should be able to fight and win. It's balanced in their favor. So that's another thing. So that's my biggest, I guess, gripe with the new edition is out of the box, it is not meant to be a challenging game. And we apologize. The dog wants attention and is clawing up the carpet behind us. This is what she does when we're not paying attention to her. So you'll hear that. Anyhow, so Stephanie's been through both 5th edition and Dungeon Crawl Classics. Now, how do you feel the tension is different in the two games?
Different? Completely. I fear losing a character every single time we meet on Thursday and Friday and play DCC. It really is. It's important because it gives purpose behind weighing your options, right? And in 5th edition, there is none. You can do anything. The likelihood of me dying is 10%. Even
Less than that.
I'm being generous.
Less than that.
For example, in my homebrew campaign, I made a Gorgon, essentially a homebrew Gorgon based on the Gorgon's Maze in Destiny, and it would turn things to stone if they went the wrong direction. There were little things flying around, but I came in and I made this huge, big, bad monster, and I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be tough. And it wasn't. It wasn't. They killed it in, like
3 rounds.
3 to 5 rounds.
It was a boss fight that lasted 3 rounds.
It was so fast.
And it was listed
as... There was no stress. There was no anxiety. It was listed as deadly, wasn't it?
It was listed as deadly in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Yeah.
And this, it's important to note, this group we're talking about are not veteran players that just know all the rules. This is a brand new group of people who had never played before. And they were walking all over the encounters. And we could say it's the DM's fault for letting it be that way, but you're running the game out of the book, out of the box, the way it kind of advises you to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. And I think with us, charging into every battle, we have, shout out to Randall, who grabs spider webs and shakes them. But while there may be temporary fear, ultimately, I think in 5th edition, every player knows nothing that bad's going to happen. So why not risk it? Because there is no risk if there really is no danger. In DCC, in the early editions, it really was terrifying. I mean, we encountered 8 giants the other day. That ain't gonna happen. So then we continue. Yes, it impacts the story moving forward. It can impact future encounters, but we know that there's risk even in walking through the woods now. There's a different level of stress and anxiety that brings that to us. And I think that, like, even when we're talking about Elden Ring, there is risk everywhere you go. That's how it should be. And you can't determine based on level, oh, well, we're first level, so whatever, the monster is going to be easy. Let's go for it. There should be some unexpected challenge. But with 5th edition, we just simply don't get that option.
And 5th edition focuses more on storytelling. And that's fine. But here's the thing. Those two, DCC and OSR and 5th edition and storytelling aren't mutually exclusive. You can tell stories. I've been telling stories with this style of play my whole life. So I've been playing these games for almost 40 years. It's a long time, and story has always been an element. But there is this constant, there's a kickback. Well, we just want to tell a story. And, you can't tell a story in OSR because, I can't get attached to my character if it dies. So I'm not attached to it. So I just, there's no story. I can't say that's not a valid perspective. Of course, if someone feels that way, then they feel that way. And again, I don't go out to kill all the characters. And even in DCC, we don't have a lot of character deaths. The tension's there, and we just lost a character last week. But that's just, when you're delving in a dungeon, that you can die. Mm. And it just makes, to me, it makes the victory more, it feels a lot better than if I win a predetermined game. And I'm not going to beat that horse to death, because I'm going to do a whole other video on diceless, or why I don't think dice are really even required in many games where you already know the result. But that's the big thing. The next thing is, it's just player expectations in modern games versus OSR games. And I kind of alluded to this. Players expect in modern games the DM to always say yes to everything that they do. And if you don't say yes, there's kickback. And in the community, you can take some negative feedback in terms, like, you can lose your group. In OSR games, it's DM fiat is really the way things go. So I prefer that, just because it just depends on the world you're in, and players can do all kinds of things to bust the game. And if you're afraid to say no, then and newer DMs in 5th edition, almost all of them none of them are going to say no. When I go look at different polls, or you talk online, you see, like, newer DMs, they don't want to kill the characters, and they're not going to say no. They don't want to be the quote unquote that guy. I don't think it is that guy to say no, but we live in a very conflict adverse society today, and that mentality in the two games is just it's very distinct to me. And that's not to say my Saturday group is they don't push. They don't. It's actually a very laid back group, and I enjoy them all a lot. It's a fun game. But in general, when I'm playing, like, when I used to DM Adventures League games in public, that was very difficult for me, because the players that you would get at your table, they're strangers, and they do not have any qualms with torching you if you're doing something they don't like. So it just makes it stressful as a DM. And I know people are talking about DM shortages and stuff these days, and all those things play a part of why that may be. But in OSR, I just find I don't have that problem as much. That's not to say I've never had a problem player in an OSR game. Of course I have. It just doesn't seem to be as prevalent as it is with the more modern systems. So those are the two big reasons why I choose Dungeon Crawl Classics. Now, that takes me to Dungeon Crawl Classics versus AD&D. Why don't I just play 2nd edition? I've got all the books on my bookshelf back. I've got, in fact, a chest full of adventures. I have an entire treasure trove of things that are collector's items that I'd love to use again. I mentioned, like, Thaco and Wizards and things that I just wasn't super happy with. Dungeon Crawl Classics modernized the old game. So everything is still based off the D20. So if you know D&D 5th edition, you know how to play Dungeon Crawl Classics. You're rolling a D20 trying to hit a target number. The armor classes are still the same. It does some really cool things, though, on top of that I really like. Number one, for spell casting, the higher level you get, the more powerful your spells go, because each spell has a chart. There's a page per spell of a chart of effects that you can achieve. And you can keep casting those spells until you fail. So first level wizard has potentially unlimited spells until he fails. You have the ability to burn luck. You have the ability to what they call spell burn, which is sacrifice physical abilities temporarily to boost your spells or to regain lost spells. So it really gives you a risk reward system. And that's, I think, the key, the risk reward. I like high risk, high reward. 5th edition is more low risk, high reward. And that turns me off. So you have that with your spellcasters. You actually have consequences to failing. If a spellcaster rolls a 1 to cast a spell, they can gain corruption. They start to get twisted like a chaos sorcerer almost in Warhammer. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that there's a risk, a tangible risk to your character. fighters they don't just swing with sword and that's it. They actually have mighty deed dice. And those mighty deed dice not only add bonuses to their hit and damage, that allows the fighter to open up their imagination to do cool things like I'm swinging to try to disarm him. All right, did you succeed on your dice? You did, cool. And the DM can adjudicate how that happens. What is actually happening with this disarm attack? There's not a hard rule anywhere. It lets the fighters and the dwarves, because dwarf is a class in DCC, which her character is a dwarf. It lets them really be creative with what's going on. That was one thing I used to love about AD&D is the spells were utility spells. They weren't just all combat spells. And I've got a book of tales I can tell you of my wizards that had to use utility spells to progress through the game. And I miss that. So those are the main reasons why I chose Dungeon Crawl Classics. The other being the art and the vibe and the feel is just all very heavy metal. It's very old school. It's very dungeon delvey. And it vibrates with me. So what do you think about Dungeon Crawl Classics as a whole compared to 5th edition?
I mean, I love it. It's so much fun. I think especially being a dwarf and having those mighty deeds, it really gives you the opportunity to paint a picture, but it also makes the player crave more information. What is in my environment? What does it look like? Are there rocks on the ground? These are vital pieces to know because you can bring those in with your advantage, right? So I'm going to kneecap this guy and try and get his head to hit a rock below him. Like there's just no end to what you could do. The other thing is really just, again, giving the player the freedom to choose, letting them choose their path. How does their character respond to that situation? Unfortunately, newer editions kind of rely on what's already been done. By that, I mean what's been done in movies, what's been done in books, what's been done in previous information that we've seen before. DCC, yes, we can play a lot of that, but ultimately we get to do whatever we want. No pre-known information, nothing prior. It's just, how do I feel in that moment? And quite frankly, in 5th edition, I may describe an environment, but why does anybody care? It doesn't really matter. And I love that it creates a clearer picture and a more vital picture for each player.
So just a counterpoint, environments in 5th edition can matter, and DMs will kick back and say, well, that's your fault for not making them matter. But again, there's a vibe to the whole editions that give a natural progression or a natural feel. The DMs can absolutely make environments matter in 5th edition, but just out of the box, you have to put that effort in, and it's a nuance. So other people may not. Obviously, I can hear the keyboards rattling now with the angry comments that are going to show up to that comment. But things I find, if they vibrate with you more, will come more naturally. And in 5th edition, for me, they don't come as naturally. Do you feel that storytelling is worse in OSR games or better, or do you feel that they're about the same? Can we tell the same quality of story in an older version of D&D, or is 5th edition just vastly superior in that aspect?
I don't know. I feel like for me, I think that's up to who's telling the story. I think that interpretation is going to differ from person to person. And when I say environments, I speak more specifically to like secrets and things we can find in the room. So let me be clear. It's much easier to say, I check the room for traps or I check for secret doors versus I'm feeling this particular brick because it looks more protruded than the other ones. It's more of an immersive experience for those that really want to dig down and feel as if their character is feeling along the wall. What's strange in this groove? What's in this grout that I might be able to find? So that creates a more immersive experience. But I don't think the story... I think that 5th edition does a fantastic job. I think the writers have done a fantastic job of creating those tales. But I think, again, it's on the DM. It's really dependent on who's telling the story, how you fluctuate your voice, your tone. Is it positive? Is it negative? Can you even set like a theme with your tone of voice? That's really what it's about. So I'd say they're even, mostly because he actually does a really great job telling stories in our campaigns.
Thank you. I agree that systems don't dictate how you tell your stories. I can tell amazing stories in any system. It doesn't matter what it is. So that's my opinion on that. But you did bring up a good point. Another reason why I like DCC over an OSR over 5th edition, it's player skill versus character skill. And what I mean by that is in 5th edition, it's your character sheet. And I talked about this earlier. Your character sheet dictates what you can do. In OSR, you, the player, dictate what you can do. So you have to be, like she said, more descriptive. You're feeling around the floor for the loose brick. In 5th edition, you say, I make a spot check. And that's it. There's two different feels in that. So the players solve puzzles and riddles, etc. in OSR, whereas the characters are expected to do those things in 5th edition, and those are handled by a dice roll versus in OSR where they're actually done in game most of the time. You can, of course, do them in 5th edition with player skill, but by default, that's not going to be the case. So that's another plus for DCC, why I like it. All right, so we've gone a little bit. We've talked a little bit about why Dungeon Crawl Classics is my primary game. I'm interested to hear what you all have to say about this. Leave comments on your favorite system of play and why that is. I look forward to reading the comments always. I do these things to generate conversation. I enjoy talking about gaming and my passions. So that is the motivation behind all of this. Anything we can do to spark up discussion is a positive in my opinion. So thank you, Stephanie, for sitting in on one of my streams. Merry Christmas to everybody. I hope you all had a great holiday, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Until next time.